and conquered, they were acting like they were like an equal partner, more or less, in trade. And before everything was just so dismal, and people, obviously, I mean, people were living in very poor circumstances, and they were rebuilding just unbelievably fast. They were buildings were going up, and like department stores similar to ours were being developed. But before, a year before, it was just little commercial places along the road, and it's just amazing the progress that they were making.
So in a year's time,
I would come here the following year also, and again the progress was just being made just rapidly.
So in a year's time, they were already building these buildings and department stores and all of this in that short amount of time. That would be quite impressive. But I like the fact that you mentioned the attitude, that they weren't as subdued. They weren't subdued anymore. That they were looking more to the future. That's really an interesting point. Mm-hmm. Very nice. Well, thank you for sharing that.
The American occupation forces had an unusual situation to contend with. At first, the people were very subdued, as I mentioned earlier, but now they were getting to be friends, and a lot of American GIs married Japanese girls. Also, a lot of merchant seamen married Japanese women, and so it became quite an affair. Many years later, when I was a pilot in the Panama Canal, several of the Panama Canal pilots had been sailing to Japan, and they had Japanese wives, and it all worked out very well. The mixed American and Japanese families. It seems like every one of their kids was valedictorian of their class in school. They were really productive people.
Mhm. Mhm. So lots of things were changing, socially, economically, and even in the emotional makeup of the people. Getting over the devastation. That's really interesting. I really appreciate you sharing that with us. One thing that I liked in your fifth voyage. And after the doctor, Purser Bell, had been dismissed, you decided to take up you didn't have help, and there was no one to replace him, I guess, right away. So you took it upon yourself to better some of your skills to help out. Share that story with us. I thought that was quite interesting.
Well, at that time, they, as an economy measure, they decided to remove the pursers from all the ships, all the freighters. The pursers took care of all the paperwork, the crew lists and the papers that you'd need for entry and exit reports all over the world. And also, most of them had attended a purser pharmacist course where they learned advanced first aid and elementary medical treatments, and so they also acted as a ship's doctor. And the paperwork that they performed was now going to have to be done by the captain or the ship's officers, and like when a ship is making port, that's when the captain ought to be attending to the safe navigation of the ship. But now he was going to have to be getting the papers ready for the local customs and immigration and all of that sort of thing. And the payroll is another thing that the purser used to take care of. Well, now the captain's going to have to, the captain be responsible for it. And so he was going to have to get help from the ship's officers. Personally, I saw that a lot of typing is going to be needed. So I started working on a typewriter. I used to type the rules of the road over and over, and that was providing practice learning to type and also helping me study for my next license exam when I wanted to move up in the ranks in the Merchant Marine. So that was kind of a sad thing. It happened all the ships at once. That was the policy. They removed the purser as an economy measure.
Mhm. Did that ever become reestablished, or did it stay?
No. The purser never came back. So my typing the typing skill that I developed came on handy.
I would say so, absolutely. So I'm curious, when you just said that it helped you for your next license exam, were you always in a mode, even as you were on the voyages and you were in the throes of your career, were you always looking and preparing for the next step up?
It was a carryover from World War II. The length of time was shortened between when you qualified to take a Coast Guard examination for the next grade up. It was a year between, like a year as third mate, then you could sit for an exam for second mate. A year as second mate, you could sit for an exam for chief mate. And then you had to be a chief officer for 2 years, examination for master. And these exams were all conducted by the Coast Guard in the different ports around the country. And of course, one of the important subjects was rules of the road, and I always had them memorized. Of course, as I mentioned, I used to type them over and over to learn how to type.
Well, that came in handy, didn't it? That's the one thing that you needed to know, and so you used that as your practice typing. That's great. I just love how that worked out. So
one thing, when I learned to type, of course, it was on manual typewriters. On the J key, and I didn't discover it till we started getting electric typewriters. And one time, I volunteered in the agent's office on a Saturday to help with the contest to set that typewriter, and that's when I discovered I leaned a little on the J key, and every time I hit the J key that wasn't supposed to be there, we had about 4 duplicate copies. So the agent and I agreed that I should cease helping.
Oh, that's funny. So tell us a little bit about you heading to Buenos Aires.
Okay. We finished our cargo in Europe, and we thought it would be a normal voyage of a month and a half, and we finished charging Italy, and we after we sailed from Italy on starting back to the Mediterranean, they told us to stop in Ceuta, Spanish Morocco, and take all the bunkers possible for a voyage to Rosario, Argentina. And of course, we'd never heard of Rosario, but it's 1,000 miles up the Rio Plata from Buenos Aires. But anyway, so we did as ordered, and we arrived in a half later, I guess it was, when we finally got down to Buenos Aires. That was one real long passage, and Perón was in power the first time, and it was a very corrupt regime down there. And the captain of my ship got enough cigarettes and whiskey to the boarding party to satisfy. It's a hard time. They claimed that we had insulted the Navy by not dipping our flag as we passed. They had a small ship tied up about 1,000 feet from the end of the pier we passed, and we hadn't even seen it, so we hadn't dipped our flag, and so they fined our ship for that. And they required a very detailed stores list to be made out, every nut and bolt and can of paint and everything, and all the storage stores. And then they came back the following day to check to be sure it was correct. There wasn't anything that we hadn't listed. It was going on and went on for 3 days. And, of course, this would have been called off for a sufficient bribe, but Captain Gillett was so mad at him, he wasn't going to give him anything. So after 3 days of this harassment, they released us, and we went on up the river to Rosario. And we had 2 Argentine pilots to pilot the ship up the river. And of course, there were no lights in the river, so we had to anchor at night. It took us, as I recall, 4 days to go up the river to Rosario, and it was a unique place. The agent and the head stevedore, the boss there, were both Englishmen transplanted to Argentina, and they were more English there than than people are in England. They invited the captain and I to their private club. You would have thought you were in a British pub or something. They had snooker tables and dart boards, and you'd never heard any Spanish. It was all English. And after dinner, we had, of course, a few drinks with our dinner, and Captain Gillett didn't hold his booze very well. And they suggested that we play a game of snooker for $50 wager. And I tried to say no, but Captain Gillett thought it was a good idea, so we proceeded. Well, I was kind of a pool shark because when I was going to high school, I had in a pool hall in my hometown, and I was able to practice whenever there was an empty table, which is most of the time, and I became very good with a pool cue. So anyway, although I hadn't touched the pool table in 4 years, and the snooker table was a little different than the American pool table. The balls are smaller and the holes are smaller, but the cue work is similar. And I was so mad at these 2 guys for taking advantage of Captain Gillett. I really concentrated, and I ran the table, which and beat them, of course. And they claimed I was a pro, and I took advantage of them. But I pointed out to them that that they had forced it on it, and I tried to stop it. And the spectators agreed with me, and so we shamed them into paying the $50, which, by the way, $50 at that time must have been worth $400 or $500 in today's money. So it was quite an event.
Yes, absolutely. Wow. I didn't know that that's what it was called. I'd heard, about the difference, but yeah, snooker table. I had not heard of that before. So, and that's quite an interesting story. So, did you get a bonus from the captain?
No, but he was grateful, of course.
I'm sure he was. Absolutely. I have one thing I want to ask you about your hobby, because, I'm imagining being on a ship and doing the type of work that you're involved in, you were really limited on what your hobby could be. But you had a hobby of trying to take a navigational observance of every star in the nautical almanac. So before we get to that, we're going to take a brief commercial break, and then when we come back, I want you to share with us a little bit about that hobby. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
With video games, I'm often choosing between what my kids want and what I think is best for them.
Hey, Mom, how about this one?
Rated T for teen with violence and suggestive themes. Let me check the rating summary. Frenetic combat, cries of pain, female warlords expose cleavage.
Maybe the other one's better.
The rating summaries are free. Use them, and you'll be armed with the world's most powerful weapon, knowledge.
For more information, go to esrb.org.